Good afternoon, everyone. So now it's past 2. Not surprisingly, having presented the practice of taking refuge, Guru Rinpoche next turns, again on page 41, to the practice of generating bodhicitta. I guess there is no more important topic for us than bodhicitta. Our practice consists, as the aspiration prayer we chant, we'll be chanting at the end of the session, that begins Precious Bodhicitta, says, our practice really consists of generating bodhicitta, increasing bodhicitta, and protecting bodhicitta. And that's about it. Nevertheless, since, as we saw yesterday, all Buddha Dhamma is included within relative and absolute bodhicitta, like taking refuge, it can be approached from different points of view. So therefore, Guru Rinpoche does that in the next paragraph. Now, usually, just to review before we go through it, or most commonly, we divide bodhicitta in a fairly standard way. We divide bodhicitta into relative bodhicitta and absolute bodhicitta. And then we subdivide relative bodhicitta into aspiration, relative bodhicitta, and implementation, relative bodhicitta. Aspiration bodhicitta is the aspiration to achieve perfect awakening or perfect Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Implementation bodhicitta is the practice that is necessary in order to achieve that. Now, there are two ways, two ways that the relationship between them have been described in the two great traditions of the Bodhisattva vow. The tradition of the profound view, which was passed by Buddha Shakyamuni to the Bodhisattva Manjushri, and by him down through Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, and so on, and is the one that most of us have received most usually. It's this one. And that's the one that we find described in Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara. And in fact, the liturgy that is used for the administration of that Bodhisattva vow, it comes from the Bodhicharyavatara. And we find that same liturgy used, for example, in the Kaju Manlam generation of bodhicitta, in the Karmakaju Mahamudra Mundra liturgies, and in many other places as well. And so when Barway Dorje gave the Bodhisattva vow, he always gave it according to that, what we call the Manjushri tradition, the middle way tradition of the profound view. The Buddha also transmitted his lineage of the Bodhisattva vow to the Bodhisattva Maitreya, who will be, of course, the future fifth Buddha. And from Maitreya, it passed down in India, finally to Atisha, who brought it to Tibet. And so it's called the lineage of extensive deeds, sometimes called the mind-only lineage, which is kind of a misnomer, sort of, because of, it's not, I mean, it's not particularly, Atisha was not an inherent of the mind-only school, so it's not really, but, and we find that it's less commonly given because it's a more cumbersome ceremony and involves separate vows for aspiration and implementation, which is what I'm coming to. But if you read the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, it's the lineage of the Bodhisattva vow that Gampopa explains in his chapters on the generation of bodhicitta in that text. The reason why the two versions of the Bodhisattva vow ceremony, and the reason why I'm bothering to talk about this, the reason why they're different is because they look at the relationship between aspiration and implementation bodhicitta slightly differently. According to the Manjushri lineage of profound view, the aspiration is like the intention to go somewhere, and implementation bodhicitta is actually going there. So in a sense, it is not a separate commitment, although in detail it can be seen as one, and we'll go through that in a second. But it's essentially the fulfillment of the aspiration itself. In the view of the Maitreya lineage, which came through Atisha, aspiration bodhicitta is a commitment to never giving up on the intention to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of others. And implementation bodhicitta is not just the implementation of that aspiration, but a separate commitment to the means of its implementation. Therefore, in the Maitreya and Atisha lineage of extensive deeds, one cannot take that second part of the Bodhisattva vow without taking Upasaka vows of some kind. Not necessarily all five, but certainly some of them. So from one point of view, it's an aspiration to a journey for a certain purpose and actually taking that journey. From another point of view, it's a commitment to the idea of the journey and a commitment to actually taking the steps. In practice, it comes down to much the same thing, because even in the lineage of profound view, we speak of the separate commitments of aspiration bodhicitta and implementation bodhicitta. So if it comes down to the same thing, before turning to Guru Rinpoche's elaboration of this, what is that same thing? In essence, aspiration bodhicitta is focused on a goal. The long-term goal, the ultimate goal, is the Buddhahood of all beings. The reason why that has to be the goal is because nothing short of it is an actual remedy for beings suffering. Even if beings are brought to the state of an arhat, they still at some point are going to have to generate bodhicitta and go through the Mahayana path and achieve Buddhahood. So why delay them? They're going to have to do it eventually. So why not aspire that all beings as quickly as possible achieve Buddhahood? So that's the final goal, the Buddhahood of all beings without exception. The immediate goal is to achieve Buddhahood yourself in order to be able to bring all beings to that state. Because unless you achieve Buddhahood, you can't bring others to it. And we'll come back to that in a second, because there is a necessary qualification. So that's the commitment, the vow of aspiration bodhicitta. From the point of view of either lineage, it's a commitment to the goal of Buddhahood for the benefit of others, and ultimately to the final goal of the Buddhahood of all beings, committing yourself to that. And so, as long as you don't turn away from that goal, then you are continuing to cultivate aspiration bodhicitta. The commitment of implementation bodhicitta, as it is normally presented in both lineages, is a commitment to practice the six perfections: generosity, moral discipline, patience, diligence, meditative stability, and knowledge. Specifically, it is often focused on three aspects of moral discipline. The moral discipline of abstention, which is abstaining from all that is harmful to others, together with the bases of such harm. So that which we would say directly or indirectly harmful to others. The moral discipline of the cultivation of goodness, which is a commitment to do as much good as you can with the motivation of it contributing to or leading to or being dedicated to the Buddhahood of all beings. And, hold on. And I've forgotten the third one. I thought there's a third one. I'll have to, maybe it'll come to me later. Anyway, and the third one. So, the moral discipline of directly benefiting beings. Yeah, sorry. So the difference between the second and the third is cultivating goodness and all aspects of Dharma that don't directly benefit beings. And the third one is directly benefiting beings. So in either case, those are the commitments of implementation bodhicitta. Commitment to the six perfections. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because since one of the six perfections, the sixth, is prajna, knowledge, sheta, there is a sense in which implementation bodhicitta involves a commitment to absolute bodhicitta and not just to relative bodhicitta. And of course, it is also true in the sense that since Buddhahood can only be achieved through the recognition of the nature of things, which is absolute bodhicitta, there is also a commitment to it. So therefore, from the point of view of the bodhisattva vow per se, the distinction between relative and absolute bodhicitta is a distinction of level on the path. And the way it's put in many texts is that the bodhicitta, they divide bodhicitta into 22 levels, which you can read about in Lord Gampopa's Jewel Ornament of Liberation and the text of Maitreya and so forth. But basically, relative bodhicitta is the bodhicitta, whether aspiration or implementation, of anyone who has not achieved the first bodhisattva level. So, practitioner on the path of accumulation or the path of juncture. When a bodhisattva, when someone achieves the first bodhisattva level, and from there onward, what their bodhicitta is called, in some contexts, at least absolute bodhicitta. Similarly, we find that in Mahayana texts, it's often said that although we speak of the two accumulations as beginners, in essence, we are only accumulating merit until the path of seeing. And from then onward, the accumulation, whether of goodness through helping others or amassing virtuous dharmas and so on, is in fact becomes the accumulation of wisdom. It's not always put that way, but it sometimes is, and it's germane to our discussion. Now, the only other complication I'm going to introduce before pulling all of this together and making it simpler, which I can only do if you know about all the little complexities, is distinctions within aspiration bodhicitta. Now, I had said that aspiration bodhicitta is a commitment to the achievement of perfect Buddhahood in order to bring about the perfect Buddhahood of all other beings. And that is how it is normally defined. However, there are three ways in which that aspiration can be phrased. And what matters for your path is how you think of it when you first generate bodhicitta, which according to the tradition is the moment you complete the third repetition of the bodhisattva vow, the vow of aspiration bodhicitta, in the presence of your preceptor. So receiving the bodhisattva vow formally from a preceptor, if at all possible, is to say the least, highly recommended. In a sense, you receive the bodhisattva vow anytime you receive tantric empowerment, but it is also good to receive it separately as well. Now, the three ways of generating aspiration bodhicitta are king-like bodhicitta, captain-like bodhicitta, and shepherd-like bodhicitta. We generate king-like bodhicitta when we think, may I achieve Buddhahood as quickly as possible so that I can thereafter bring all beings to that state as quickly as possible. And that's fine. It's called king-like or monarch-like because a king can only protect their subjects when they have first consolidated their own authority. So therefore, a king first consolidates their authority and thereafter uses that authority to protect their subjects. The second type of bodhicitta is captain-like bodhicitta. And that's the thought, may I bring all beings, including myself, to Buddhahood simultaneously. It's called captain-like bodhicitta because the captain reaches the destination, the port, at the same time as their passengers. And although this sounds less practical, it is superior. It is superior as an aspiration because there is less I, me, mine in it. Less focus on oneself. It's even more unselfish. And finally, there's shepherd-like bodhicitta, which is the aspiration, may I bring all beings to the state of perfect Buddhahood. May I only thereafter achieve Buddhahood myself. May I not achieve Buddhahood until each and every other being has achieved it. That is the most powerful of the three types of aspiration bodhicitta. It's called shepherd-like because the shepherd drives the sheep to pasture first, and then once they're munching away, the shepherd eats their lunch. Then the shepherd brings them back home safe, and then only then goes home to their bed. Now, ironically, well, not ironically, it makes sense if you think about it. Shepherd-like bodhicitta, in spite of the person's intention not to achieve Buddhahood before any other being, causes Buddhahood to occur all the more quickly. But what it does is it causes the person to, like Manjushri and Chenrezig, who are the foremost examples of this, Vajrapani also, actually all 8 of the 8 close heart zones, but typically we talk about Chenrezig and Manjushri, causes them to act, even though they've achieved perfect Buddhahood countless aeons ago, to primarily act as bodhisattvas. Now, how can a Buddha act as a bodhisattva? Well, if there's Buddhahood the state, and then there's Buddhahood the job. Buddhahood the state, Milarepa had, Guru Rinpoche had, and so on. Buddhahood the job means what the Buddha did. Founding Buddhism on a planet where it doesn't yet exist. Manjushri and Chenrezig have done that countless planets elsewhere, but the Buddha did it here. So in a sense, they work for the Buddha, we would say. But as the Buddha said himself, while Manjushri manifested as his disciple, Manjushri was actually the being from whom he first received the Bodhisattva vow, in whose presence he first generated bodhicitta. So, in a sense, Manjushri is the teacher of the Buddha. And you can read about that if you read the book, The Eight Bodhisattvas, which Barway Dorje taught, which is why we translated it, and I guess you can actually get it free online. So if you look at dharmaebooks.org, I think it's called, you can download it, The Eight Bodhisattvas in English, by Mipam, what Barway Dorje taught. It's the book by Mipam itself, but he taught it for free. And some people like it, some people don't seem to. So that's about aspiration bodhicitta. Now, all of that's complicated. We've got two lineages of the Bodhisattva vow that explain the relationship between aspiration and implementation slightly differently. We've got three different ways you can formulate aspiration bodhicitta. And then even once you do, we've got the 6 perfections, each of which has several parts, which apparently I can't remember very well. So that's complicated. But to string it all together, the point is that the nature of aspiration, bodhicitta, its essence is it is natural to us. The nature of implementation bodhicitta is that it is the natural implementation of aspiration bodhicitta. And obviously absolute bodhicitta is our nature. So therefore, ultimately speaking, all relative bodhicitta, aspiration and implementation, is the affect of the presence of absolute bodhicitta as our true nature. For that reason, you can say anything you want about how they fit together, and there's no contradiction. So those are the usual ways that bodhicitta is divided. But to understand what Guru Rinpoche is going to say about bodhicitta, we need to understand that he can be talking about relative and absolute bodhicitta indistinguishably or inseparably. Otherwise, it's going to seem to be, it won't be as clear. First, he says, generating bodhicitta as aspiration and implementation for the benefit of beings is external bodhicitta. So because it is the actual aspiration and implementation of that aspiration to benefit beings, who we perceive as external to us, as others, it's still external bodhicitta. Knowing all sentient beings to be unborn, just like the emptiness of your own mind, is internal bodhicitta. So knowing that beings are like magical illusions is internal. It's internal because it's the natural affect or display of an internal experience or realization. Now we find this, for example, in the jewel ornament of liberation and other places where Gampopa and the other teachers talk about 3 levels of compassion, 3 levels of love, and so on. There's referential compassion, which is with reference to sentient beings. But then there's also compassion that is referential to reality and compassion that has no reference whatsoever. The difference, as it's normally explained, is that compassion referential to sentient beings is the equivalent or similar to or analogous to what is called here external bodhicitta. Compassion with reference to phenomena or dharmas is the compassion that you feel as a result of the recognition that all of this suffering is unnecessary. So, for example, when we look at a sentient being suffering, we feel compassion, hopefully. That's referential, a compassion referential to a sentient being. Compassion is focused on that being. When we realize emptiness, we realize that all of our suffering, including the suffering of that particular sentient being, comes from not realizing emptiness. That if we had not made this mistake of not realizing emptiness, there would be no suffering. So that's called compassion with reference to dhammas or phenomena. Some you can think of, you could explain it as dhamma too if you want. And when we fully realize emptiness, because we're talking about the sutras here, then there would be no concept or thought. The compassion would be completely full, complete responsiveness, as free of concepts and thoughts as the sun's light shining is. So when Guru Rinpoche here makes the distinction between the external bodhicitta of aspiration and implementation for the benefit of beings and the internal bodhicitta of knowing all sentient beings to be unborn, just like the emptiness of your own mind, the distinction he's making is parallel to the distinction Gampopa makes between the first 2 types of compassion. Third, generating an understanding of the selflessness of persons and dharmas or things is secret bodhicitta. So now what's the difference between that and the second one? The second one is knowing beings to be unborn. The third one is an understanding that grows upon that knowledge, a further understanding of the selflessness not only of beings, persons, but of things, dharmas. So to put it simply, external bodhicitta is an aspiration that we have as an ordinary person. Internal bodhicitta is a result of profound meditation experience influencing and ripening that aspiration. And secret bodhicitta is when we begin to achieve realization of the true nature of things. An even simpler way of putting it is that external bodhicitta is still dualistic, self and other. Internal bodhicitta involves the questioning of that duality or dualism, and secret bodhicitta involves the direct experience or emerging understanding, growing experience of the non-duality. And then finally, not conceptualizing the 3 aspects, the generation of bodhicitta, the bodhicitta generated, and its generator as absolute truths is very secret bodhicitta. Now, the three aspects are the three aspects of any interchange that occurs. And so therefore, when we talk about dedication free of reification of the three aspects. So let's say you give a homeless person money so they can have a meal. Then you dedicate the virtue of doing that to the awakening of all beings, that homeless person first and foremost. That's the standard way of doing it. That's sort of the basic Mahayana template of how you give money to a homeless person. You give them the money, but then you dedicate the merit of it to their achieving Buddhahood and all beings also. But there's still reification. There's you who gave that money. There's the money you gave, and there's the person, the beneficiary to whom you gave it. And there's these three aspects are still present in the dedication. There's you, the dedicator. There's the merit of having given the money to the homeless person that you're dedicating. And there's the beneficiary, the homeless person and all other beings to whom you're dedicating it. It's okay to dedicate in that way. It's not ideal. It's called corrupt dedication, poisoned dedication. It's not bad. It's still safe, relatively safe, because you've dedicated it to awakening. But the only perfect dedication is dedication free from threefold reification. That is dedication when you realize that you, the giver of the money for the meal, and the dedicator of the merit of doing so. The money you gave the homeless person and the merit you dedicated, and the beneficiary, the homeless person who received the money will buy the meal and is also the beneficiary of your primary identification of the beneficiary of your dedication, that none of them truly exist. Which puts us in a tricky spot because we don't know what that means. Do they exist or not? If I don't exist, how did I pull out $5? If the $5 don't exist, how did I hand them to the homeless person? And if the homeless person doesn't exist, how can they be hungry? It doesn't make no sense. As long as we feel that, that means that we are not capable of actual Mahayana dedication, the full dedication, according to the profound sutras. Therefore, the only solution is to engage in what is called concordant dedication. Concordant dedication is where you refer to the manner of dedication of those who know this stuff. So you say Manjushri, Samantabhadra, and them. Meaning, it usually refers to the Bodhisattva, Samantabhadra. In one of our liturgies, it refers to the Buddha, but in either case, they both know this stuff. Just however Manjushri did it, that's how I want to dedicate it. Yeah, like him. Like when you're at a restaurant and you see the person in the table next to you has something that you know you want to eat. So the waiter comes and says, "You want a menu?" And you say, "No, just bring me theirs." That's concordant dedication. In this case, it's concordant ordering. You're concording with the other person's choice. You don't have to understand. You didn't have to make the choice of reading the menu. You can tell by the smell of the food, their evident enjoyment of it, and what it looks like, that you want it. So then you take a shortcut and you say, just bring me what they're having. And that's what we do. So it's not in the short dedications that we do here, but in most dedication prayers, we include a stanza, typically from the aspiration to the conduct of excellence, which of course comes from the Avatamsaka Sutra. And where we say, and about that merit I'm dedicating, I dedicate it in emulation of Manjushri and Samantabhadra, and in accordance with their knowledge. It's like saying, yeah, I'm going to do it the way they do it because they know this stuff. You almost literally say the people who know this stuff, which is Manjushri. It sounds like you're cheating, but you're not. You're allowed to do that. And that's why that type of dedication is so important. I don't know why we don't have that stanza in our dedications here. We have other ones, but most times, most Tibetan Buddhists will include that stanza. Gyamtso po jita chimpa Kunzang Palchen Ling deta kunji jisotaro chingewa deta tamjiro mo. That's very important. I don't know why. I don't know. Anyway, but that's very important. That protects your merit. You protect your merit by dedicating it to the awakening of all beings. That protects it from things like your anger and so on. You won't be able to destroy it with a moment of anger. Otherwise, your merit, anger is like a clear button on stuff you haven't saved on your computer. It just erases everything. Good. So a moment of strong anger can destroy the merit of 1,000 kalpas. So if a kalpa is, let's say, 30 billion years, that's a lot of merit. So dedication is very important, but to make it not only protected, but to cause it to really become a cause of perfect awakening, you really need concordant dedication. Until you achieve the path of seeing and become an Arya Bodhisattva, then you are one of the people we refer to in concordant dedication. So that's bodhicitta, and now we'll have questions. And if you run out of questions, I can go on, but people have mentioned they wanted to ask questions. And also, Kathy and I are both here. When it's just one of us, it could be fun, but when we're both here, Q&A is going to rock. It's going to be entertaining. It's like what do they call it? The World Wrestling? I forget. There's one's the World Wildlife Foundation and one's the World Wrestling Foundation, or something like. And I mixed them up. And wasn't there a lawsuit about that? They had the same acronyms. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, we're more like the wrestling than the wildlife. Except we're not faking it. Yeah. All right. So we could start with, are you going to do the ones from online?
Yeah, I can do that.
So why don't we have one from the room? Let's not have Kathy yet, because you're going to wake up now just because we're having Q&A. But when you start to get sleepy again, then we'll have Kathy, because that'll really wake you up. And then, so let's start with somebody else from the room, and then we can have one from online.
Don't have to lean in.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Don't have to lean in. You
No.
don't have to hold it.
Thank you for the teachings. I want to, if I can.
Lean in a bit, because you're hard to
Can
hear.
I go back to page 30?
Wait, all right. I'll leave it to the people who know these things. Okay,
So I'd like to go back to page 39 at the beginning,
okay.
second paragraph after Guru Rinpoche starts talking. Could you talk a little bit in practical terms about the samaya of body and how one might do that?
Sure.
And then also the samaya of speech and
Yeah.
how that's used actually in practical terms.
So you keep the samaya of body in practical terms by remembering that your body and everything you see is the body of your yidam inseparable from your guru. So if someone were a practitioner of Chenrezig as their yidam, then your body and everything you see is Chenrezig in nature, however it appears. You don't have to erase it or change it or color it or anything. That's what they say. Pumajur do manyam, or is it pumanyam do majur? I can't remember anyway. It means you don't have to pick hairs out of it or arrange it, but its nature is Chenrezig, or whoever it is. It could be Tara, Kila, Yamantaka, White Kichari, whatever your yidam is, and inseparable from the guru. The yidam is the form the guru takes. And with regard to speech, you remember, so it's not that you have to imagine it. In practice, you imagine it, but you have to remember that that is its true nature. To remember that, you have to believe it. So the first step is getting to believe it, which is why I recommend that people read Establishing Appearances as Divine by Rongzong Pandita, which I know Jim has read and you are reading. And but anyway, whether you read that book or any other, the point is to understand that the logic of Mahayoga is existential, not imaginary. The true nature of things, the true nature of aggregates and elements is the Buddhas, male and female Buddhas. That's what they really are. Another book that could be read for the same purpose would be Mipam's Beacon of Certainty, but that's much harder. Then, then speech is the same thing, that the nature of all sound is mantra. The nature of all sound is mantra. So the first step is believing that, and the second step is remembering that. Okay.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the name of that first book, please?
Establishing Appearances as Divine. Some people appear to have it as a PDF that they might be willing to give you a link to if you're nice to them. It's very good. I haven't read it in English, so I don't know how it is. I know there's an introduction, and the text itself is relatively little of the volume, but I think it's probably pretty useful. Okay, now from online.
One person asked, where can we read more about the cosmology and prophecy described last morning? For example, Barway Dorje being the 268th Buddha.
I don't know if it's 268th or what. Let me look it up. I have it in my phone. I mean, I have the document. This is how this whole deal started with me needing to back up my documents because I couldn't find this reference. It was when I was teaching the five chapters, and I just mentioned it, and I couldn't remember the exact number because I didn't have the translation in which I had translated that. And I may not be able to. I mean, I can find the document, but I may not be able to find the reference in it. Previous lives. What happened was when we commissioned these tankas of the previous lives of Barbara Rinpoche, these very tankas, Rinpoche and Lama Trota collected together short biographies of all of these figures. And Rinpoche had me translate some of them, the ones that we don't have long biographies of. And in one of them, it mentioned who this being that we call Barway Dorje or Nupchen Lama Yeshe or Jisin Milarepa or Namche Binja Dorje or, you know, the Chetsang Rinpoche of Somang, whatever you want to call him, that guy, that being. You can't say guy because sometimes he's a girl. Yeshe Tsojo is definitely female. So that person will be, well, let me do a search for fortunate beyond. Find. So who was asking this question? That was which one is it? Where can you read about it?
Travis.
It's Travis asked that? I don't want to talk to him. No, it's in this thing that I'm looking at right now. But there's other, I don't know. Oh, but the actual place where you could find that out is the Kalpabhadra Sutra, because that's where I looked it up. And the Kalpabhadra Sutra has been translated as the Fortunate Kalpa or Fortunate Aeon. We have a copy both in Tibetan and English in the KPL library. So Travis, the next time you're here, look it up. It's a big, thick book, as sutras tend to be, published by Dharma Publishing in Berkeley. And it's in there. I think it's in the statue Shranam, not the stupa Shranam. So, and it's in the, I think if you're facing the statue, it's on your far left in the upper bookcase, upper shelf. So that's where you can look. And let me find Kalpa. I'll just look up Kalpa. Future Buddha of this fortunate aeon named Leader of the Great Assembly. Okay. And that's the only place that says Kalpa, so look up Buddha. So all right, so somebody in the room can ask another question.
So I would like to say thank you for these teachings this weekend. I appreciated it as well. I hope that everyone else. So I wanted to ask, from my personal experience, I've been learning to kind of go between two extremes of trying and then letting go, but then it's too much letting go and then too much trying. And sometimes I try to have the fake it till you make it attitude with bodhicitta, but I don't think that is the right view. So my question is, at what point can we really just like have the confidence to let go and know that we're not just doing nothing, but like just like be able to kind of relax and like be okay with that?
From time to time, you will be able to do that. But it's probably not going to be, you're never able to do it, and then all of a sudden you are, and then from then on you'll always be able to do that. It's going to be, sometimes you'll be able to do that, and sometimes you won't be able to do that. So that's why we mostly practice content-rich techniques. so it doesn't depend on spontaneity. But content-rich techniques don't obstruct spontaneity. They lead to it. And you can be continuing a content-rich practice like reciting a mantra, visualizing deities, or even doing prostrations, and still have that sense of spontaneous letting go. So don't wait for it, it'll come by itself. And then it'll go by itself. Don't expect it to stick around. Eventually it will stick around, they say, but that's just, as Lama Yeshe would put it, rumors I've heard about a place I've never been. Are you entering the ring?
Yeah.
Well, wait a second, because we get one from online now. Because we just have one. Matt just has one.
This Travis has one.
Is there another one?
Travis has.
Travis had one, and then Matt
Travis
had one.
has another one.
Travis has another one? Oh, okay.
Give it to Travis.
So, by the way, in pursuit of that, when I looked it up, I didn't write the number down. I just, because he didn't give it in the biography. I think it was in the 200s. There's one of the 1,000 Buddhas of this fortunate man, and his name is Leader of the Great Assembly. Anyway, and that'll be. Anyway, but Barway Dorje will be that, or that will be Barway Dorje. Most of these great teachers, like Buddha, like Sutta Rinpoche will be the 5th, the next one, the Karmapa will be the 6th, Barway Dorje is later down the line, Gyamtso Rinpoche is going to be one of them, I can't remember which. Most of these great eminent masters previously were among Guru Rinpoche's 25 disciples, and in the future will be among the 1,000 Buddhas of this Kalpa. So I used to make fun with Barway Rinpoche. I used to say, you're just a little gang. It's just a bunch of you, it's just like it's a bunch of 25 guys, well, men and women, doing all this stuff. It's like, it's all of you. Every tulkus are you guys. It's like a little clique. It's like a little club of Buddhas here, which he thought was very funny. For example, we have 100 major and 1,000 minor tirthas. And the 100 major, of course, there's about 220 of them. It's not that we're bad at counting, but we just don't care. We use numbers very, very generally. Like 100,000 songs, that just means a lot. It doesn't mean a boom, it's like when we use the word myriad in English. Myriad really means 10,000. A myriad is 10,000. It comes from Greek, but we use it to mean lots. Yeah. So
Except for my accounting office.
yeah. Except then we got to be precise. Yeah. There's 100 major tirthas, of whom there have been about 220 something, and then 1,000 minor ones, of whom there've probably been 2,000 or something like that. But 100, 1,000, it sounds nice. It's not less than that. It's never less. We underaggerate. We don't exaggerate. We inaggerate? I don't know. There's probably no word. So, I forget where that started.
What's the question? Travis or Kathy?
Well, Travis. Because once Kathy and I get into it, that may be it for the rest of the session.
Travis is.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to say, so I didn't write down the number, but if you read the Sutra of the Fortunate Aeon, whatever it's called in the English translation, which we have, it'll give you the number. I think it's 267 or something like that. Okay.
Travis asks, I've read establishing appearances as divine, and I've struggled with it a bit, as its reasoning reminded me of how Christian logic works for proving the truth of the Bible. The Bible said God is infallible, and God says the Bible is infallible, so they're both true. I was wondering if Lama could maybe help put the book into better context.
Well, you seem to be describing tautologous logic, where two premises are used to serve as proofs of each other. so that we know that God is infallible because the Bible says so, and we know that the Bible is infallible because God says so. That's what he said in the question, right? I don't remember Rongzong's, I guess we can call it an essay or treatise, as being tautologous in that way. I might have to reread it. If you've read it, if you, Travis, have read it more recently, then maybe it is. Maybe I missed it. What may appear as a tautology in the reasoning may in fact be the assumption of what in Tibetan, in Buddhist logic as practiced by Tibetans, is called a pervasion. And a pervasion is a premise that is accepted as both true and valid by both parties in a discussion. So it covers. So for example, if I were to construct an argument and one of the premises were that we here are in the shrine room at KPL, then everyone here would accept it. And that would be called a pervasion because it's not an object of dispute. So it may be, I suspect, that what may have happened is that Rongzong's argument may refer to the Mahayana statements and used the acceptance of their inerrancy or infallibility, we would say, as a premise in his argument about essentially the relationship between Buddha nature and appearances. The simplest way to understand this issue of the divinity of appearances is by understanding the relationship between mind, appearances, and so what we mean by appearances to start with, and what we don't mean by them, and what we mean by divinity or deity. I think in the case of Travis, he understands very well the Buddhist and Mahayana Buddhist and Vajrayana definition of mind, so we'll skip that. It's important to remember that appearances, nangwa, are defined as what is experienced by mind. So there's a difference between nangwa and nangwe yul, the objects that appear. Nangwa is the same word as in nangwa tai amitabha. It can mean light or projection. So a lot of times when people want to sound more psychological, they'll translate it as your projections. But it means what you experience without taking a position necessarily on the relationship between what you experience and what might be out there in some purported objective reality. So the first thing to understand is that you can't experience outside your mind, which is obvious. When put that way, of course, it sounds like saying nothing. If you experience it, it is by definition your mind that is experiencing it. So it is, in a sense, within your mind. So therefore, it would be stated that it is impossible for a person, a given person, to experience anything beyond or outside their mind. Therefore, everything, all the appearances that you experience, everything you experience is the display of your mind, the way what you see on the screen of a computer monitor or an iPad or an iPhone is the display of what we could say in that device. We could distinguish between the display and the device, but we would have to agree that the display cannot exist in the absence of the device. It could exist as the display of a different device, but there has to be a device at this point. And we can still use the technology we have for that. That's eventually we're going to. So to put it simply, everything you experience is filled with your mind. Now, your mind is filled with Buddha nature. There is no corner or part of your mind, in fact, in reality, that is not Buddha nature. Let's use the word Buddha nature rather than deity because it's just easier. Wow. So your mind is filled with Buddha nature and your appearances are filled with your mind. Therefore, when it's said that appearances are Buddha nature, it means that they are filled with Buddha nature, which means there's nowhere where appearances can be that Buddha nature is not. So it's not saying that statement. That's just one statement. It's not saying that the whatever objective reality there may be, and the existence or non-existence of objective reality is a different topic that we're going to leave for a moment. Whatever objective reality there may or may not be, your experiential reality can never escape, can never pass beyond Buddha nature. Now, you might say, but what about that which is mixed with the Buddha nature, the display? There can be a display of appearances. You say that they're interpenetrating, but they're still distinct. Then we have to take it further. If we go down that avenue, then we have to look at, well, what does it mean when something is literally filled with something that there is not? Because when we think of the interpenetration of mind and appearances, we're imagining, like warp and woof, that there's still some distinction. That's not true interpenetration, because we can, on a very, very close focus, we can actually see the separate strands and see the different bits. But these things that we're talking about here don't have bits and pieces. Buddha nature does not have bits and pieces. Mind does not have, really, I mean, mind's functions we can analyze. But so in a sense, there's nothing else. I suppose that, to put it the simplest way, since you are really the Buddha or a Buddha, and you cannot actually experience anything that is truly other than you, not really. You might seem to, but not really. There is no such thing as self and other. Therefore, you cannot in reality experience anything other than Buddha. That's the way I would explain it. In a simple, it's very simplistic. It's not tautologous reasoning. What we have to be careful with in the Buddhist logic as it's practiced is the use of analogy. Analogies are illustrative, but they're not logical proofs. And sometimes we have to be careful with that. So we can say, well, that's just like saying blah, blah. Well, to say X is just like saying Y, it doesn't mean that X is Y. Okay, now, go for it. Do you need the mic, or are you gonna really belt it out?
I don't know.
Of course we need them.
We need-
Oh, that's right, for the
I know my ego needs.
for the Zoom. Oh no. Zoom.
And I'm not gonna lean into it, look at me, I'm gonna lean away from it. Okay, I would like to start by backtracking to Matthew's question because I didn't really understand the answer, and I think it has something to do with my question.
Okay.
So, yeah, can you?
I don't remember his question.
Okay, Matthew, it was something about easing into it.
Yeah. Oh, spontaneity and yeah. Well, why don't you ask your question, and then it may remind me of his question if it's.
Okay, so I have two questions on
Okay.
my brain, and they're both probably interview worthy, but here I am. And one is I started years ago, actually the year Rinpoche passed, doing Vajrayana practice.
Uh-huh.
And I had struggles with it back then,
Mm-hmm.
but I had more time to deal with the struggles.
Okay.
And then for my own sanity's sake, I needed to take a break from it. I asked for permission. That was the whole thing. But my problem is, because when you were talking yesterday about how these practices are really hard, it's a tough way to go. So what would happen to me is I'd pass out, fall dead asleep. I'm doing my practice and something happens to me, and either in the middle of doing the practice or right afterwards, I would have to sleep for 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to a point in this whole remaking of my life thing, I don't have 2 hours to pass out. I can maybe carve out the time to do the practice,
Mm-hmm.
but not the time to practice and sleep for 2 hours,
Right.
which seemed to go together. So I needed to take a break from the practice, and I tried to start it back up a few times,
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing happens.
Mm-hmm.
So is that just me being the crazy woman who does too much and I'm tired, or is that I just don't even know what to do with that.
Well,
So I haven't been doing it,
uh-huh.
and I'm working towards getting my life to a point where I could afford to sleep for 2 hours if I needed to, but
Right.
I'm not quite there yet.
Well, first of all, I can only go by your description, so I have to ask questions about what the feelings are. For example, you use the term struggle. Do you mean that you struggle to make yourself do it? Do you mean, or that when you have no trouble making yourself do it, but when you do it, you struggle to be fully involved in it on an emotional level? Or do you mean that you struggle for it to mean something? These are all possible experiences that a person might have, and they don't mean that there's anything wrong with you or that you're crazy. If each of these practices work for everybody, there would only be one. If all Buddhas are one in the expanse of wisdom, the only reason we have, billions and billions of different deities is because we had billions and billions of different people, you know, and different forms of the same ones and so on, simply because we are different. So, in other words, the tradition understands and is prepared for the fact that someone could conceivably find that a practice assigned to them is a tough fit. So, but that can manifest in different ways, and the solution depends to a great extent, the remedy, on how it manifests. One way, as I say, is you just feel nothing. Another way is that the practice actually makes you feel worse. Those are two different things. Feeling nothing, being unaffected by it, you know, and feeling worse, two different things. Another way is that you like it in theory, but when you actually sit down to do it, your mind can't bear it or can't come to rest in the practice. And then there's another way, which is where something about the practice generates a kind of I hesitate to use the word antipathy because that sounds like a no-no, but I mean resistance, such that you find yourself unconsciously avoiding it, finding ways to avoid having to do it. So which of those sounds most like what you're experiencing?
I will say a couple of years ago, I had the experience that because I had moved here and I was doing I was getting here for the monthly pujas, that I felt a lot more familiarity with doing the console than with the dakini practice. And I really wanted to do the dakini practice at home sometimes, so it became as familiar with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first motivation. I do feel some movement in me when I do kilaya practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really more just that it moves me so much that I almost can't afford to do it right now.
Okay.
Because if I do, I'm not going to get this other mundane work done that I need to get done for my life. And yes, in my perfect world, I would just live in my cave and not have these mundane things distracting me, but I don't.
Is it in part an issue of time?
Oh yes, very much. So if I could do the practice and just let it affect me however it does, and I fall asleep for 2 hours, like if I had time to do that, I would gladly do it. But I know when Rinpoche was alive, he gave a lot of us different assignments.
Yes.
On how many of these things, and Rinpoche's not here now. And so really where it all started from was that I felt like I was coming here and I was doing the dakini practice and I didn't get it at all. And I felt like if I was doing it at home, I could, but I was told that I cannot do dakini practice until I do, a kajillion
Kilo.
And
did you do the Gurumshe practice before you did Kilo?
Yeah.
So you did the Ngondo and then you did the Gurumshe practice and you were given numbers of things to do in each and you did those and then you were told that the next thing in sequence was Kilo.
Well, to be perfectly honest, Rinpoche told me, okay, now you have done this, I give you the freedom, you can choose whichever one, you can do whatever you want.
Okay.
But I read in the commentary that, the sequence of things is now I would do Kila practice.
Well, it doesn't have to be. See, that's the thing. The sequence is based on the idea of if you list the 3 roots, you typically say Guru, Yidam, Dakini, in that order. But there is actually no, I mean, if you do a 3-year retreat, that is the order you will do them in. And the people who are training you, now that Rinpoche is gone, are people who are basing the way they train people to some extent on formal group retreats. But it's important to do Ngondro first, and you did that. When it comes to the 3 roots, the question of what order you do them in, and even whether you do all of them, is kind of up to you, traditionally.
And can you be doing Yidam and Dakini,
Of course.
back and forth? I mean,
Well,
we do
you
here, but like in my personal practice.
Yeah, it's a good idea to have one practice that you do every day. And then,
Which I do my Guru Yoga, like,
okay.
without fail.
And then the practices beyond that you can do in alternation. The issue of mantra accumulation is, if you are accumulating, if you set out to accumulate a set number of mantras, once you start that, once you personally take that on, it's not good to stop just because you'll remember that you stopped. And it will cause you simply to lose confidence in your own ability to commit yourself to such things, which may make you feel a little insecure. But the basic idea is if you have a practice that is kind of your fundamental baseline practice, Guru Yoga, then everything, what other things you do can vary. And
And Rinpoche never gave me the mantra
number.
right. I mean,
Well,
that
I
was in the
remember-
book and that was in the, so I never really.
I remember you
excited about
had
it.
started doing Kilo when Rinpoche was alive, because I remember you asking him about it.
Mhm.
And
And he didn't give me a specific number.
but he didn't.
But I have since then been given some specific numbers.
Was it 1,200,000 or 500,000 or?
I have it written down somewhere.
Okay.
It was
Yeah.
a lot. And at the time, I was like, well, and in all honesty, Rinpoche gave me modified numbers of everything I had done so far anyway, so that was overwhelming to me.
Well, one of the things about our tradition is that I hesitate to use the word higher, but I have to use it. I mean, the higher a teacher is in the hierarchy, the more freedom they have in their prescriptions.
Well, and
So they can go off label. And
which Rinpoche said he could in this lineage, but not in the Karmakagi when he was,
actually, he could,
well,
according
that's what
to,
he told me.
well, that he was being modest.
Okay.
But and Lama Chota is cautious, not so much in that he's cautious with others, but he doesn't want to overreach. He doesn't want to give himself, he doesn't want to take liberties, and wants to, respect tradition, because he wants to be cautious and not be too independent of the tradition. And that's where the numbers would come in, because that would be the number you would do if you were doing that as a practice. But the number thing seems to be a problem for a lot of people in the West. And in some cases, it's simply that people don't want to do that much practice, but that's not the only thing that's going on here. Because I've known other people who were really happy doing loads and loads and loads of practice, saying loads and loads of mantras, but they just didn't want to count them. They would do them, but the process of accountancy, mantra accountancy, just somehow made them nuts. And the truth is, there are three ways, and we discussed this last time. There are three ways to gauge the measure of practice. There's the effect of the practice. There's the time spent on the practice, and then their number. And in all sources, they will say the effect or signs of the effect of the practice is the most reliable gauge. The reason we don't use that is because it can be very subjective, and also people are sometimes a little bit, there's a possibility of self-deception. It can be harder to get a handle on. So the second one is time, which is easier to measure. But then with something that involves concrete repetitions, like the preliminaries or mantras, number is easy because you don't need a clock. And, a mala, a rosary, is lower tech than a timepiece. You may not have had access to a timepiece, but you certainly, unless you were in a communist prison, had access to a mala in Tibet. So, but it's also a function of the way people's minds move. Now, I'll tell you something about myself. I have a terrible time timing my meditation. I will spend the same amount of time meditating or practicing, whatever you call it, happily, that I would if I timed it, except that if I timed it, I'll be miserable. Once there's a clock involved, I'm just looking at the clock. I hate time. I hate clocks. I just always have. I get they just make me nervous. If I have to get up tomorrow, I'm not going to sleep well tonight. I may get up earlier if I don't have to get up, and I might sleep well. But the thought that I have to get up just pisses me off, and I can't sleep. I get angry. So the idea of do this for an hour, I used to be able to kind of do it about 15, 20 years ago. I was okay with that. But now the resistance. I just resist it. I rebel. And I want to take the closest to the timepiece, which is now everything tells time, right? Pretty soon our glasses will tell time. And throw it out the window, which I'm not going to do because I also like my devices. But I love measuring by numbers of mantras. I'm the opposite. That never bothered me. I've always found it soothing. A little bit, being able to count mantras is soothing to me the way having a teething toy is for a teething baby, or, knitting. There's some people that have a much, we were talking about this at lunch, I think. Some people have a much easier time watching a movie if they can be knitting while they're doing it. Then they can pay attention to the movie and enjoy it. But if they have to sit there and just watch the movie, they'll go bonkers. So for me, the mala is like knitting needles, and it kind of calms me down a little bit, which you may not like numbers. That may be an issue here. Another thing that I wonder, based on your account, is when you talk about falling asleep, and it sounds like a very deep and relaxed state of sleep. I wonder, and I could be completely wrong, if what's happening is that Kila makes you feel safe. A level of safety that enables you to relax and fall asleep, and that's what's going on. And if so, that's a good thing. It's an inconvenient, but it's a good thing, and you should not be poo-pooed. Sept once, many years ago, was teaching across the river, and he talked about people complaining about falling asleep when they meditate. He said, that's a good sign. If you fall asleep when you meditate, it means that your mind is relaxing. It's not ideal. You don't want to end the journey there. You want to be able to move beyond that. But it's a good sign because it means that your mind is actually doing something. So if Kila makes you fall asleep, then you'll have to do some juggling to arrange when you can do it. And make sure you've got, a place you can fall over and stuff like that. But it's a good sign.
Yeah, and it does feel more like the safety thing that.
Well, then that's good, because what's happening, see, you run your own business, and you are in charge of a lot of things. And your personality is you are a take charge kind of person, right? I mean, you're an alpha, you're not a beta. I'm a beta, so I know. And Kila may be your only experience of not having to be in charge. So it may be a sign of faith that somehow you identify your guru and the deity together. And even though you're visualizing yourself as this person, it's not you. And Barway brilliantly used to talk about this. The whole thing about the yin on this, it's not you. You're not there. You're gone. Forget about you. Gone. It's not you. You don't have to be in charge. That may be what's happening. And if it's uncomfortable, it may be because you have so rarely, like many of us, felt safe enough to surrender control. And Kila may be one of your first experiences of being able to do that and know that it's not going to, destroy you. Maybe it's that. If it's that, you're very, very lucky. That's a really good problem to have.
I just have to get back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And it's going to be winter soon. It's easier to get back there when it's not raining so much.
But it sounds like it really sounds like it's about safety and feeling.
And the better I visualize where all the guys are.
Yeah, then you start to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Well, they call them armor deities. They call them armor deities because although they're inside your body, they are the Buddhas of the 10 directions protecting you from everything that come at you from any direction. You run a business where your mind has to be focused on shit coming at you from any direction, right? You work with horses. You work with movement and powerful animals and crazy people who want you to sell them. You deal with all this stuff. Things coming from left field. Kila's got guys for that. For this, he's got a guy here, he's got a guy there. So you don't have to, it's probably the only place in your life where you don't have to, you can surrender the reins. If that's it, that's really good. You're really lucky.
I hope that's it. And I'm just to the point now where I haven't been doing it lately because I can't afford the time of what it does to me.
Sure.
Because I'm overwhelmed right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's gonna level out. You know, I just got my house done. I've got my life is gonna level out here.
The thing to remember, you remember yesterday I said that the thing about Vajrayana is it's chaotic. You remember when we talked about how the Buddha, or Guru Rinpoche mentioned, how the Buddha couldn't teach Vajrayana openly because people just couldn't handle it. The people of the culture and society at the time couldn't handle it. Well, you're getting into the area that we're talking about. You know, our rituals are clearly prescribed and they follow a certain sequence and so on. But there are the, what's the board you stand on when you jump into a swimming pool?
Diving board.
Diving board. Those prescribed rituals are the diving board. They're not the dive. When you dive off, you jump up, you land back on it, you bend it, and it shoots you into space, right? So the diving board is not chaos, but it is an enabler. It is an enabler of chaos. So Kila, for you, seems to be a bit of a diving board. And this is traditional. At one time, Machi Globden, the founder of Chut, was, before she was a big deal and people realized who she was receiving an empowerment from I forget whether it was, she had so many teachers, not just Padampa Sanjay, but Chotan Sonam Lama, many others. She was receiving a Mahamaya empowerment. So a kind of a Heruka of the Mother Tantra. I think it was Mahamaya. And early in the empowerment ceremony, when they got to the descended blessing, where the actual deities come into the disciples. The deities are called by the guru giving the empowerment, and they actually enter the disciples. And that's real. We sometimes don't experience it because we're so jaded, because we've had empowerments and we've had so many empowerments and experienced so little that we've become jaded, which is a problem. Well, Machi Globden wasn't jaded, she was Machi Globden. So there was 3 or 4 of them receiving this empowerment. And when the deities entered into her, she, beyond her control, flew up out the window and ended up in a tree in some altered state. And the Lama giving the empowerment paid no attention to this because he was from India, where Vajrayana was less gentrified. In Tibet, it became sort of, part of the system, but in India, it was always seen as transgressive and suspect, and therefore it was kept secret. Vajrayana, you go to India, you'll never see statues of Buddhist tantric deities. Maybe Tara, maybe Chenrezig, that's about it. It was always very secret and it was suspect. It was never, it was practiced by everybody in Nalanda and places, but it was never quite
Mainstream.
Yeah. It was always a little bit not mainstream. And so he paid no attention. He went on with the empowerment and he gave the rest of the empowerment to the people who were there. And at the end, one of the other women taking the empowerment went out, found Machi Globden up in the branches of the tree, and somehow got her down. And brought her in to see the Lama, and she said to Machi loved her in front of the Lama who was giving the empowerment, said, "It's a pity that happened to you because you missed the empowerment. It was great." And the Lama said, "No, you missed the empowerment. She got me." So we have to be careful with these stories because we don't want to attempt to cultivate chaos. We don't want to attempt to fabricate spiritual states. But something chaotic and uncontrollable happening to you when you do deity practice is a very good sign. It's not supposed to be cut and dry. This is not church on Sunday. I mean, we could have church on Sunday. Today's Sunday. This is kind of a church, but this is not something we can control. If we can control it, it's samsara. We've seen what control does. And I think that's what the issue here is, control.
And it's that I just, at this moment in my life, I can't afford the chaos.
No,
I need to get through this hump that I'm in right now
sure.
and then bring on the chaos.
Okay, well,
But
good.
um,
but the thing.
but I wanted to check in with somebody because it's like a thing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
No, this is good. That's a good problem to have.
yeah, 'cause
Yeah,
I
that's-
don't just like doze off a little bit like I do in teaching sometimes. No, I mean, I like out.
If it's not, unless it's a blood sugar thing. Like sometimes people have weird stuff, physical stuff that because of where they schedule their practice, and they become hypoglycemic and they have experiences because of that. As long as it's not that, then as long as it's, really kila and not just a physical thing, then that's good. That's not a problem. Okay.
Okay.
That was your first question.
It was. Should I let somebody else go before I ask my second? Yeah.
We can have one from online and then get back to you.
Okay. This is only 3:40.
Prajnakai asks, what is it about anger in contrast to the other kleshas that gives it the power to demolish kalpas of merit?
I don't think it's the only one that can do that. I think they just use it as an example. I think jealousy could do it. Pride definitely demolishes merit. Desire, probably. I mean, we can destroy ourselves with that. I mean, that's what addiction is, right? And apathy is the worst. So I don't think it's special. I think it's just they use it as an example. We tend to use anger as an example because it's the most proximate problem. Anger causes the most immediate destruction. The others cause destruction just as much. But I remember when speaking about environmental issues, His Holiness the 17th Karmapa said several times that we think anger is the worst problem in the world, but actually there's one that's worse, and that's apathy. He said because with anger, at least at some point we realize we're angry, but apathy can be disguised as equanimity, and the two things are very different. Equanimity is loving all aspects of the world and all persons equally. That's different from apathy. It's the opposite. Okay.
Anybody else?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Um,
Don't lean into the mic. A little bit, but
Over there?
we have a thing. This is a routine that we do. So
It's a routine.
Yeah, it's a thing. We got a thing. Kathy and I have a thing. Jeff and I have a thing. So that's why you're walking into the middle of a cereal here.
You did give a very good example today of the outer, inner, secret, and very secret meanings, but I missed the very end of the very secret.
With refuge or bodhicitta? Was it this morning or this afternoon?
It was this morning.
Then it was
You were
refuge.
describing those. If you could review them and
Yeah.
then
Then it was refuge.
make a very secret.
Was it the
clear.
sources of refuge or the attitude of, or the
Well,
feeling of refuge?
In general, the concept of when things are outer meaning and inner meaning.
Well, the general idea is that outer is what we perceive as external to ourselves. So, for example, and of course the boundary between outer and inner changes because there is no really. There are not really outer and inner. Most of the time, I'll use myself as an example. I think of everything beyond my skin as outer, and everything inside the bag or container or membrane of my skin as inner. So my mind, which I ignorantly believe to inhabit my body, is, let's say, secret, or secret in the sense that you can't see it. You can see my body, and I can see my body, but I can't see my mind. You can't see my mind. That's what means secret. That's what secret means. But the difference between outer and inner is sketchy, because on an emotional level, we think of outer as not me. Either you, them, or it. Those things are the categories of outer. It means an object, not a being. Them means beings that we're not actually dealing with in dialogue or in interchange. You are the person I'm dealing with. But you, them, and it are all outer. They're all not me. This is the way we think of it. So from that point of view, me consists of body and mind. But which of the two is really me is kind of fishy, because we say my mind and my body. So is my mind me or my possession? If I call it my, it's my possession. At least grammatically it sounds that way. If I talk about my body, it implies that my body is my possession. And certainly we say that. We say we own our own bodies. We have the right to control our own bodies. When we treat the body as a possession, then we think of the mind as the owner. So I means my mind own my own body, my possession. And when we think of the mind as mine, like I have trouble with my mind is prone to depression, my mind is all over the place, then we're thinking of the body as the owner and the mind as a possession of the body. So it's a little bit fishy. And we certainly don't think of both as the owner, otherwise we would never say I, we would say we, right?
The royal we.
Yeah, we would be we. So, but basically, outer is external to your body, inner is within your body, and secret is your mind. It's secret in that nobody can see it. It's private. It's only you know what goes on with your mind. And very secret or super secret is your mind's true nature. Another way to think of it is that very secret is the truth in which outer, inner, and secret are not really three different things. Because when I think of the world, I imagine that it's out there and I'm in here. So the way I think of it is the mind is an inhabitant of this body. And this body experiences the outer world. My mind cannot experience the outer world directly. It can only experience the impressions of the outer world that come from the body. So from that point of view, the outer world is outer, external. The body is inner, and the mind is secret. But there's a funny thing about that. Although my mind can only experience the external world, as far as I know, through the avenue of my body's five senses. If the mind doesn't experience the experience of the external world through the body is in fact part of my mind's experience. It's not all of it. My mind also experiences itself and its own thoughts and so on. And dreams when we're asleep, for example, which are not experienced by the five senses. So therefore, in a sense, the mind contains the body's experience, because the body's experience is part of the mind, not all of it. So from that point of view, the mind is outer, and the body is inner within the mind. And your body's experience is partly internal and partly external. You can experience, so for example, if I have a stomach ache, I'm not experiencing the external world, I'm experiencing the internal world of my body. My stomach, or probably my intestines, are in distress. And even when I do experience the external world, I'm actually experiencing it, as we've seen, through the five senses. So therefore, the external world is actually contained within my five senses. The external world that I experience is actually contained within my five senses, which are part, not all, but part of my body. So from that point of view, we could say equally well that the mind is outer, it's the container. Some part of that, within that, is the body. And some part of that is the body via its sense organs experience of the external world. So from that point of view, we can turn the whole thing on its head. And what we thought of as outer is secret, and what we thought of as inner remains inner, token. But what we thought of as a secret becomes outer. And that's the very secret level where they're not separable.
And secret is not to be kept from other people.
Not in this
private,
case.
It just means it's your experience that no one else.
You can't communicate it. It's not that you shouldn't communicate it, it's that you can't communicate it.
Right.
You can't, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to explain it, you do not have to infer how you feel. You know how you feel because you feel it. But you can't really describe how you feel to anyone else. You can imperfectly describe it, and they can attempt to infer it, but it's secret. It's not something that they can ever experience. You can never actually share someone else's experience. It's private.
Thank you.
Yep, we've got good, Phyllis, good.
We have time.
Oh, we've got plenty of time.
I'll hold it.
Okay, basically, I think actually you probably answered this, but I might have been asleep. It is just before, it's on page 41, just before talking about the generating bodhicitta.
Mhm.
It's the last part of describing the generation stage. And it says the equal perfection of samsara and nirvana in their illusionary primordial liberation is very secret refuge.
Mhm.
And I was just wondering if you didn't mind to clarify that a little bit.
You probably weren't asleep. I kind of dealt with that very briefly, but it's like this. When we take refuge, we do so with the idea that there are things from which we want to be protected, and a state of protection that we want to achieve or enjoy. We could summarize everything we want to be protected from as samsara. Running around in circles. And the state of ideal or full or perfect protection, the ultimate state of receiving refuge, is nirvana, the state of the transcendence of misery. So, but ultimately, in taking refuge, if we take it to its ultimate level, we have to realize that ultimately, to transcend samsara, we have to give up the concept of a samsara to transcend. Because the very idea of something we need to get away from is what's keeping us running in circles. And to achieve nirvana, the idea of a state, a transcendent state, we have to give up the idea of transcendence. Because the very idea of that there's somewhere else we could go, something else we could become, someone else we could be that would be better, is what keeps us running in circles. So the ultimate act of going for refuge is taking refuge, admittedly in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, that we be freed from the concepts of samsara and nirvana, ultimately. But we have to begin with the concepts of samsara and nirvana, not because we need to learn them, but because we already have them. We already have this idea of we're spinning, we're running in circles, we're frustrated. So therefore, we already have this idea of escape. You know, the Buddha didn't invent these ideas, we have them. So we need to admit that we have these ideas, understand them, and then transcend them. That's the meaning of it, basically, on a basic level.
We have time for more?
One more, yeah.
We have one online or Michael. There's one online and Michael.
Oh, one online and, Michael, go ahead, because he's here. And then maybe we can also do one online. Oh, yeah. Well, Michael, anyway, because he's online.
Thank you, Lama, for providing this teaching and being very patient with us. I have a question about the feeling or the intent of taking refuge. And it was, I'm trying to remember, and I probably didn't write it right down correctly, but there was, you were talking about the role of the kleshas and how there's-
Okay, yeah, it's in the text. It actually says, bringing kleshas to the path as wisdom is secret refuge.
Okay,
Yeah, that's the sentence or the line that you're asking about.
that's correct. Thank you. And the one example that I struggle with is the klesha, particularly of pride.
Mhm.
And I think you had mentioned, made some other very helpful statements. I think one about homeless people as well, which I found very helpful. And then what I struggle with is the aspiration of taking refuge to liberate others and to liberate myself is the discernment of that kind of feeling of why others need to be liberated or that they need to be saved, and that I am the agent of that,
Mhm.
or then it comes back to me saying, well, I need to be saved, and I also need to save others because of some distorted view that we need to be saved somehow, that we're damaged or stuck in this mess, in this swamp.
Well, when we generate bodhicitta, we focus on our own agency in bringing about the awakening of all beings, because we're trying to reverse our usual tendency to expect a free lunch. We usually want everyone else to take care of problems and to reap the benefits. So we're turning that on its head, which is very characteristic of the Mahayana. And saying, no, I take responsibility today. We say when we take the Bodhisattva vow, I have taken responsibility today for the welfare of everyone. So therefore, all of you rejoice. You now have a protector in me. And we actually say that in the Bodhisattva vow ceremony. You say that immediately at the beginning of the conclusion. Now, in practice, we're not that arrogant. In practice, we have to be prepared to be the hero, the rescuer. We don't know who's going to achieve awakening first. So the attitude is really, in practice, is may whoever among us achieves Buddhahood first lead the rest of us to Buddhahood. And in practice, we're not actually that concerned about who gets there first. It's just that we're willing to do it. If we have to, and if we can get there first, then at least no one's going to drop the ball. It's like if everyone were 100% committed, everything would get done. The ball would never get dropped. And no one would actually end up doing 100% of the work. Because everybody is willing to. Things would just get done. There'd never be a problem. The problem we have is everybody says, okay, I'll do 50%, or I'll do 25% of the work. But somebody else says, that's when balls get dropped. And that's why there's this language of totality and heroism and so on. It's not that, I don't think that because I took the Bodhisattva vow, that I am going to achieve awakening before everybody I know. I don't worry about it, you know. We just have to be ready, you know, to be the hero if there needs to be, when there needs to be a hero, or if we can be a hero. And we have to be willing, by the same token, as you implied in your question, to accept help when we need it. You know, and we see this attitude embodied in the scriptures where, Buddhism and the three jewels sounds very, very hierarchical, but if you look at it in detail, it's a lot more nuanced than that. Probably the most famous of all Buddhist sutras is the Heart Sutra. The Buddha says almost nothing in that sutra. Chenrezig does all the talking. The Buddha enters into a samadhi. Somehow that causes Shariputra to ask Chenrezig a question, and Chenrezig's answer to that question is the main body of the teaching. And at the end, the Buddha says, yeah. Says, good. It is just as you have said. Women and men wishing to practice profound do that, they should do it like that. Yeah, what he said. Now that's the Buddha. This is the Mahayana. So it's not like we're not thinking that Chenrezig is a cosmic figure who in some way outranks the Buddha. Chenrezig is definitely subservient to the Buddha. But the Chenrezig does the heavy lifting, at least verbally, in the sutra. And the Buddha doesn't say, hey, now wait a second, I'm the boss here. You shut up and let me talk. It's not like that, it's not like that. And if you read the stories of Manjushri, you'll see that the Buddha and Manjushri go to great lengths to make this point. I mean, when we define the iconography of Manjushri, we say he holds the sword which cuts through the web or bonds of ignorance. But there's a story behind that sword. And if you read the story, it's iconoclastic, and it's about this thing. So we have to be ready to do it all ourselves, but we don't have to pretend that we think we're better than anybody else. We're over time. We should stop. So we'll chant the dedication, the full, starting on page 7. Salam Deye Lanje Zemba Done Yege Lama Yeshe Lama Yeshe Lama Gunye Gyamtso Maje Alam Jeju Jermanyam Bhagya Bhagam Gonde Gondo Lavashu Senchen Lanje Gedam Denjo Ngenro Lanje Tatu Lombasu Gyamtso Sampaganda Sajo Deva Gunje Zanje Thank you.